Okay, friends, I'll give it a shot at going over the objectives for the quiz coming up later this week on cellular energetics. First objective was to explain why all life needs to carry out the process of cellular respiration. So it's a good idea to define what cellular respiration means. And it's just simple that you break down food, your nutrients, to release energy. And why do cells need energy? And cells, which we're made of, do everything. That they grow, they move, they make chemicals for us, everything. And all these functions require energy, and we have to get that from our food. Second objective, describe the relationship between ATP and ADP. And I'm going to run these together, explain how ATP is used by cells. So here's ATP. I'll expect you to recognize the ATP, not the structure, but it stands for adenosine, and the T is for tri, and there's three phosphates, these three phosphate groups. And I use the analogy that ATP is like a battery that's charged up and ready to go to power all those things to apply energy to the cells. And the problem is that we can take in sugars and fats, and there's a lot of stored energy in them, but we can't use them in that form. First, we have to change the energy stored in the sugars to ATP. And the way ATP works is that we have the three phosphates. When one phosphate pops off, energy is released, and it's then that energy can be used by the cells. And at the same time that it's popping off, you're constantly breaking down food and carrying out respiration. And in the process of respiration, we release energy, and that energy is used to put the phosphate back on again. And so it gets restored. So it's this continual process of ATP breaking down to ADP, and in the process releasing energy for the cells, and then respiration carrying out by the cell, releasing energy so that more ATP is being formed. So it's this continual cycle that's happening over and over and over again. And I'll get through those real fast. Didn't mean to put those in there. But number 4, describe the relationship between cellular respiration and ATP. Well, when it comes to cellular respiration, which is this process right here, of course. And I shouldn't have done all this fancy stuff with this, but that's okay. It produces energy, and the energy that we're going to be forming is ATP. And so when we talk about that process, how ATP relates to respiration, remember, it's the same thing I said before, that respiration supplies the energy for making ATP, because we need the ATP. It's this continual cycle going around of making ATP from ADP. See, number 5, what's the difference between a reactant and a product? Well, in any chemical equation, there's a starting point, which is on the left side of the arrow. There's the arrow, and then there's what you end up with on the right side. The beginning parts are what we call the reactants. In this case, sugar and oxygen we start off with, so those are the reactants. And what's given off is CO2 and water, and those are the products. So every chemical reaction starts with something, ends with something, and it's pretty easy to remember that the products are what you end up with, and reactants are what you start with. Okay, compare aerobic cellular respiration to fermentation. Well, as soon as you hear the word aerobic, you think oxygen, and basically you're breaking down something, in this case sugar, without oxygen. And fermentation is breaking down food without oxygen. And you can see in both these cases here, we start with sugar, but in only the aerobic one do we start with oxygen here. The other part of that is when you compare them is how much energy. I use this analogy in class. You get a bushel of crabs, you take it to 3 different fish markets, and 2 of them say, hey, I'll give you $2, but one of them says 36, I would go with the 36 every time. And that's basically what happens with when you have aerobic versus fermentation. You get 36, which is a great deal. So if you look at these 3 equations again, you definitely want to, if there's a chance to do it, to break down your sugar with oxygen, you get 36 ATPs as opposed to only 2. At least you still get ATP and some energy because you can't use sugar in that form, but it's not nowhere close to the 36. And one last little comparison here again. With oxygen, you get 36 ATPs. Without oxygen, only 2 ATPs. Aerobic respiration versus fermentation. Okay, be able to recognize the following reactions and where they occur. And of course, the first one is because of the oxygen, aerobic cellular respiration. We're starting with sugar, ending with ATP. The other 2 start with sugar, end up with ATP. So it's sort of it's a type of respiration, but without oxygen, of course, they're fermentation. One being alcohol, one being lactic acid. And the last one is photosynthesis. Describe the role of mitochondria and chloroplasts in cellular energetics. Well, the mitochondria is where respiration occurs. And I happen to show a plant cell here, and even though it has chloroplast, there's still mitochondria. So mitochondria, where aerobic cellular respiration occurs. I'm not going to ask you where fermentation occurs, but actually fermentation occurs in the cytoplasm. And then what about chloroplasts? Well, you should know by now that these green chlorophyll-filled structures is where photosynthesis occurs. And I think I got most of the objectives covered there. Maybe the last one was comparing photosynthesis with respiration, but remember, the reactants of one are the products of the other.